I'm Turk Strongman at Thrawn Kiramacharaga. Thank you for selecting this, what number is it? Sixth video in the series on the law of rhythm and how to use it. Before I get started with the continuation here, by way of turning to the arcane formulas now, leaving the arcane teaching and going to the arcane formulas with my commentary as we go. Before getting started, I just want to ask you if you do me a favor. When we get to the end of the video, if you decide, hey, I like that, then please give the video a thumb up, okay? And if you haven't done so by now, take the time. Take the time to subscribe to this channel, activate the notification bell feature, and share the joy of the channel with others, as always. Now, with those things having been humbly requested, now, Lesson 7 from the Arcane Formulas, Mastering of the Opposites. Now remember, we're talking about opposites here. Polarity. The principle of polarity, the law of opposites. Mastering the opposites. I'm talking about that because rhythm runs hand in hand. The law of rhythm runs hand in hand with the law of opposites in operation. We set that out before. Okay, so that's why we're doing this. Next will come neutralizing rhythm. Okay, mastering the opposites, the manifestation of egohood, or as I call it, true selfhood, by the individual who has learned the secret of the excluded middle. That the excluded middle was discussed in the chapter just before this one, but it wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary as a prerequisite for getting to neutralizing rhythm. So I skipped that one. Remember? But here it is. Here's what it is in a nutshell. Who has learned the secret of the excluded middle? Who has learned to will? Because our closest way of talking about the true self, the true ego, is to just call it will. Learned to will because you are will. Evidences itself in a variety of forms and phases. In the mastery of the opposites, however, we find one of its most important phases, and one which also influences other forms. The individual who wishes to mold his mind by his newly awakened will, and thus acquire poise and balance, must first learn the art of mastering the opposites in the instinctive, and emotional regions of his mental being. In the instinctive and emotional regions of his mental being. In acquiring this art, he also does much in the direction of gaining poise and balance, and in neutralizing rhythm. We have seen in the arcane teaching that every quality, attribute, or condition has its opposite. We have seen how these pairs of opposites are in reality, but the different and contrasting poles of the same thing. Just as heat and cold are the same thing, just as hard and soft are the same thing, so love and hate are seen to be but the contrasting poles of the same thing. And in the same way, and from the same reason, all contrasting emotions, states, and feelings are but the opposite poles of a fundamental emotion which depends upon the will for its expression and its outward activities. Maybe you see where we're going with this. Maybe sounds like something's fitting together here. All activity proceeds from and through the will. The will is involved in all action. There can be no action without will. through the stimulus and incentive of desire, feeling, and emotion, the will is called and directed into activity. I said something about that in the last video, the immediately preceding video. But the will itself, now, remember, must not be identified with the desire, feeling, or emotion, which inspires it to action. Just as the water in a glass may be colored by a chemical dissolved in it, and yet in itself remains as much pure water as it was in the beginning, so is the will colored and apparently changed by the influence of the emotion or feeling operative in and through it. The will is clear and colorless like the water, its emotional color being not of itself. Very interesting here. I just want to interject. The will is clear and colorless like the water. That's not just a metaphor. That's not just a comparison or an analogy being made, for the purposes of explanation here. Clear and colorless. That shows up somewhere else here in my videos. In a different context, but still about will. When you assert the positivity, the polar positivity of your will over, let's say, another person's or other people's. Or, and you use a visualization of your will, or even more germanely here, if you want to, let's say, project an atmosphere of psychic protection, and you want to picture it, and you want to ask, well, what color is it? It's clear. You project the positivity of your will over circumstances, entities, influences that are not in your best interest. Clear. It's clear. All right. The will experiences the color of the emotion or feeling, but never is the latter. The will is always the vehicle for the emotion or feeling. It's vital energy, so to speak. The will is the body of action, which clothes itself in the garb of emotion and feeling in order to make itself manifest. To the ordinary, how much time we have here? Oh, we're still good. To the ordinary person, it would be an impossibility to divorce feeling and emotion from the will. For if that were attempted, there would be nothing left apparent or manifest in any way. Now, the residuum would be like the abstract conception of motionless, cold, unmoved, pure intellect, independent of any object of thought. And to such persons, pure will is merely a name corresponding to nothing in their experience. This is so because in such persons, the will is unconscious of itself. When the ego consciousness is attained as the true self, the true ego, when the I knows that itself and will are identical, then the will becomes conscious of itself. In this latter state, instead of its consciousness remaining centered on the emotional and feeling plane, the instinctive plane of the mind, that is, it is raised up to its rightful seat upon the throne of the real self, and it assumes the scepter of power and authority which really belong to it. That's that transmutation we were talking about, I think, 2 videos ago. Now we've got to that in the how-to part. Listen very closely. Repeat this video. If I were to repeat all this stuff, I would just be droning on. You're going to have to listen to this video numerous times and pause it. Think about what you just heard, maybe one sentence at a time. All right? Consider the meanings of the words and the phrases, the sentences, the propositions that are present here. Okay? When you do that. But I will state again, when the I knows that itself and the will are identical, then the will becomes conscious of itself. And in this state, instead of its consciousness remaining centered on the emotional and feeling plane, or the instinctive plane of mind, it is raised up to its rightful seat upon the throne of the real self. The real self, and it assumes the scepter of power and authority which really belong to it. So, when the ego consciousness is acquired to a certain degree, the I, realizing that it is in its inmost nature nothing more or less than will, sees that the opposites of emotion and feeling are but things belonging to, but not of itself, things objective to its subjective self. It sees them as but garments, which it may put on and off as it suits its fancies or interest. It sees them as but the several masks of character which it may place before its face, and then take off in exchange for another, as may seem best or desirable. I've said many times here that our emotions and so forth, for the aspects of our character and personality, all of these are instruments, tools of expression. Tools, they're instruments of the true self and the will. They are instruments of expression. They are not the true self. They are its instruments of expression and experience, energy control, expression. All right. From the moment when this realization comes to the individual, even in the faintest degree, then that individual has begun to move toward freedom and has started on the road to the mastery of the opposites. All right, where are we? Okay, we'll keep going a little bit here. Contrast to the condition of the man who is still hypnotized with the belief that his emotions and feelings are himself. That he is the character he is playing, with his emotions and feelings and incidents of personality on the one hand, and on the other hand, the individual that realizes that he himself is on this other hand. Now, compare that other guy with this guy, that he himself is will in his real nature, and that the character assumed by him, together with its incidental qualities, feelings, and emotions, is but an objective something, which he may put on or off, destroy or change, as he may see fit. Compare those two people. Can you not see that there is a difference as wide as the poles in the contrasting being of these two men? Can you not see that one is the master of the opposites and the other the obedient slave? Let's call it short right there. Let's call it quits for now. We'll see you in the next video for the completion of the narration from this source. Well, I guess it'll be 2 more videos. One to finish this part right here, and then at least one for neutralizing rhythm. Okay, now, did you like the video? If you did, then please give it a thumb up. I said I was going to remind you, and my goodness, if you didn't subscribe to the channel back then at the beginning when I suggested, then please do it now. Activate the notification bell feature. Share the joy of the channel with others, and remember, you heard it first right here on Thuran Ki Ramacharaka. I am the Turk Strongman. Now, go be well.